Men and women dedicated to what their country stood for and anxious to do their part began broadcasting from the fourth floor of a New York City office building. In those early days, under the able direction of John Houseman, programs were recorded on acetate discs and then shipped via bomber to England and Latin America for broadcast. From this humble beginning, the Voice of America has grown into a respected institution of American communication, a global radio network broadcasting 905 hours weekly in 39 different languages. Though born in war, Voice of America continued in peace and has made enormous contributions. Today, as we witness new forms of inhumanity threatening peace and freedom in the world, the Voice of America can perform an even more vital function by giving an objective account of current world events, by communicating a clear picture of America and our policies at home and abroad. The Voice serves the interests not only of the United States, but of the world. The Voice of America is, for many, the only source of reliable information in a world where events move very quickly. Perhaps today I can outline a news story that you may be hearing about, or as I've already found out, many of you have heard about it already. And that was that a short time ago I announced at a meeting of the Organization of American States a new initiative promoting peaceful economic and political development in Central America and the Caribbean Basin. That area of the world was dramatically affected by the rising price of oil and the subsequent economic uncertainty of the last decade. There are those who have sought to exploit this instability. We in the United States are concerned not only because of the proximity of those nations, but also because we've witnessed on too many occasions the suffering and oppression that invariably follows the establishment of Marxist dictatorships. In the months and years ahead, the United States will work closely with friends in the Western Hemisphere, like Mexico, Canada, Venezuela, to promote economic growth, social stability, and political freedom in the Caribbean Basin and in Central America. On our part, we intend to offer a bold new opportunity for social and economic progress. The centerpiece of the program is a free trade arrangement for Caribbean Basin products exported to the United States. This will encourage new economic development and a better life for the people of the area. Also included in the program are incentives for investment and further financial aid, technical assistance, also for the area. We will furthermore seek to encourage the democratic process in the region. All too often, extremists from right or left have sought to undermine social and economic progress, hoping to impose their will by brute force. This mentality is unacceptable to the United States and the free peoples of the Americas. It has no place in this hemisphere. The United States intends to continue its support to those who are struggling to establish democratic institutions. The communist-dominated guerrillas of the region offer nothing but the same bankrupt ideas that have imprisoned the populations of Cuba, Vietnam, Afghanistan, and yes, Poland. On March 21st, free peoples around the world will join in observing Afghanistan Day. In marches, meetings, and rallies, they will express their support for the heroic freedom fighters of Afghanistan in their brave struggle against Soviet aggression. I'm happy to say that the Voice of America will provide through thorough international coverage of Afghanistan Day. Today we celebrate this 40th anniversary of an institution that has given hope to the citizens of those communist regimes and all victims of tyranny. The challenges we face are no less grave and momentous than those that spawned the Voice 40 years ago. Freedom is no less threatened, and the opposition is no less totalitarian. In this struggle, there's no greater weapon than the truth. Free men have nothing to fear from it. It remains the ultimate weapon in the arsenal of democracy. Now, of course, I know there's a great deal of discussion about the truth as if there are degrees to truth. No, truth can be told. I remember my first experience because more than 40 years ago, I was a pioneer in radio, a sports announcer. And I found myself broadcasting Major League Baseball games from telegraphed reports. I was not at the stadium. And a man on the other side of the window with headphones on and a typewriter would hear the dot and dash of the Morse code and type out and slip under the window. And knowing that there were 6 or 7 other fellows broadcasting the same game, they did it that way in those days. You could take your choice of who you wanted to listen to. And you had to keep right up with the play, even though you weren't there. So you'd get a little slip and it would say, out, 6-3. And now, number 6 on a team is the shortstop, not on his back. That's the numbered position. Number 3 is first base, so you knew that had to be a ground ball to the shortstop. Now, if the game was rather dull, you could say, it's a hard hit ball down towards second base. The shortstop's going over after the ball, makes a wild stab, picks it up, turns, and gets him out just in time. Now, I submit to you that I told the truth. It was out from shortstop to first. And I don't know whether he really ran over towards second base and made a one-hand stab or whether he just squatted down and took the ball when it came to him. But the truth got there, and in other words, it can be attractively packaged. Also, I should say in those days of radio, my goodness, they're long gone, when you had a sound effects man in a studio, and he had a wheeled cart, and on it he had every kind of device in the world for your radio dramas. From coconut shells that he beat on his chest to be a galloping horse, or cellophane he could crumple for a fire and everything. And one day, and I'm only telling this because it shows that there is still room for initiative. One day we had a play that called for the sound of water falling on a board. Well, this poor fellow, during all the rehearsals, he was working. He tried rice on a drum. He tried dried peas on a piece of cardboard. Tried everything. Nothing would give him the sound of water on a board. And finally, one day, he tried water on a board. And it sounded just like water on a board. Well, we're justifiably proud that, unlike Soviet broadcasts, the Voice of America is not only committed to telling its country's story, but also remains faithful to those standards of journalism that will not compromise the truth. Recently, we celebrated the 250th birthday of George Washington. He understood the power of truth and its relationship to freedom. The truth will ultimately prevail, he said, where there are pains to bring it to light. Today, we have this responsibility, bringing truth to light in a world groping in the darkness of repression and lies. Let us rededicate ourselves to the task ahead. And like the Founding Father, we can be confident the truth will prevail. And if truth prevails, freedom shall not perish from this earth. Thank you for all that you're doing.
A warm round of applause has just greeted the President and his remarks to the Voice of America on the occasion of the 40th anniversary of the founding of VOA. I might mention that the President has shared the podium with the first director of VOA, John Houseman. The President really seemed to enjoy reliving some of his early days as a sports reporter at radio station WHO in Des Moines, Iowa. He also took the occasion to again highlight his Caribbean Basin Initiative, which he had outlined just a little more than a half hour earlier at a meeting of the Organization of American States. The President pledged that the United States will work to promote economic growth, social stability, and political freedom in the Caribbean Basin and Central America. Mr. Reagan said he will seek to encourage democracy in the region and added, extremists from both right and left have sought to undermine social and economic progress, hoping to impose their will by brute force. This mentality is unacceptable to the United States, Mr. Reagan said, and it has no place in this hemisphere. Again, referring to the 40-year history of the Voice of America, the President said that now, as in the beginning, truth is a vital part of America's arsenal. He said that by giving an objective account of current world events, the Voice of America serves the interests not only of the United States, but the world. You've been listening to a special broadcast of an address by the President of the United States, Ronald Reagan, on the occasion of the 40th anniversary of the founding of the OA. This is Larry James in Washington.
Good evening, I'm Alan Silverman. VOA news analyst Chris Kern has some thoughts on the Voice of America's 40th anniversary, which we would like to share with you today.
40 years ago, in its famous first broadcast, the Voice of America pledged that whether the news was good or bad, it would tell the truth. Journalistic truth is not the revealed truth of the religious believer or the ultimate truth of the philosopher. It's the fragmentary and transitory truth of the working news reporter who has to gather what facts he can in the limited time that's available before he's required to go to press or on the air. It is at best the imperfect truth of the best approximation. It's grounded in the belief that there's an objective reality out there somewhere, a set of facts that do not shift with the viewpoint of the observer. This approach was challenged at the time that VOA was founded by the practitioners of the propaganda big lie. To Hitler, the news was whatever suited his immediate ambitions. Stalin actually rewrote history to fit the political climate of the time. The big lie propagandists are still around today, even in this era of instantaneous and ubiquitous information. But the real challenge to independent news reporting comes in a more sophisticated form. This is the idea of a new world information order in which the news will be shaped to fit the imperatives of economic development and nation building. Its premise is that too much international reporting is sensational and divisive, that the free press tends to concentrate on conflict, that the bad news tends to drive the good news out. The argument is not so much about the premise. Controversy is news by definition, and what's interesting or unusual is not always very nice. The argument is over the solution. The proponents of the new information order favor the licensing of news reporters and an international code of journalistic ethics. The defenders of the free press oppose any authoritative control over the gathering or the content of the news. There is a natural tension between a free press and any government. Governments have a natural interest in managing the flow of information. The third American president, Thomas Jefferson, serves as a sort of patron saint of Western news reporting. A government without newspapers would be worse, he warned, than to have newspapers without a government. But that was before he became president. Afterwards, he complained, the abuses of the freedom of the press have been carried to a length never before known or borne by any civilized nation. The tension between politicians and news reporters is inherent. The question is not how it can be relieved, but whether it's going to be tolerated. And if not, whose particular perspective is to take the place of the admittedly imperfect efforts of independent news organizations to gather and report objective facts. Chris Kern, VOA, Washington.
Amerika im Krieg. Unsere Stimmen kommen zu Ihnen aus New York über den Atlantischen Ozean. Sie werden von unseren...
Those words, spoken in German by William Harlan Hale, were the very first words broadcast by the Voice of America. The date was February 24th, 1942, during some of the darkest of the dark days of World War II. During the last 40 years, the world has changed a great deal. On that first broadcast, we said, the news may be good or bad. We shall tell you the truth. That, at least, has not changed in the past 40 years. This afternoon, here at the VOA studios, we had a birthday party with all the trappings you might imagine, food, drink, and some celebrities, including the very first director of the Voice of America, the noted actor and theater director, John Houseman. Tonight on the magazine show, we're honored to welcome the present director of the Voice of America, the Honorable James B. Conkling, with a 40th anniversary message for all our listeners. today, the Voice of America is observing its 40th anniversary, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about it. In its first broadcast in 1942, the Voice of America promised to tell the truth. And that's something we adhere to firmly to this day, and we take great care to verify the information we broadcast. Throughout the world, we have many correspondents, and it's their job to get us the facts right, both for us and for you. The Voice of America believes that the free flow of information is absolutely a fundamental human right, as it was expressed in the United Nations Declaration only a few years after the Voice of America began broadcasting. We believe that a large and well-informed international public can be a very potent force for peace. America is a pluralistic society. The roots of every single American, except for the American Indian, can be found in every single country of the world whose people emigrated to the United States. We speak in the name of the American people for the whole United States, a nation which was born through revolution. 6 years ago, when we observed the bicentennial of that revolution, we realized that it really had never ended. Ours is a nation which is in constant revolution in our social and economic life, in the arts, in the sciences, in the sports, in everything we do. And that's the magic of the continuing American Revolution and its attraction of the Voice of America broadcast. We think all sides of a question ought to be examined in a fair and in a balanced way. During our first 40 years of operations, the Voice of America has traveled a great distance. Our regular weekly listening audience has grown from perhaps a handful of people to more than 100 million people today. By speaking in 39 languages, we hope we've become a friendly and a familiar voice throughout the world. As to the future, one can only begin to guess at the outline. First on the agenda is a new emphasis on the quality and originality of our programming. We're trying to improve content and substance, and our goal is to become an exciting and an informative voice of the 1980s, worthy of the satellite age. We dream of making virtually all of the broadcasts truly attractive, the kind of listening experience which inspires new generations to join us, well, as automatically as the seasons change. And we're very conscious of the fact that more than 3/4 of the people on this earth are under 30 years of age. On the technical front, we have plans already drawn to greatly strengthen our voice with higher powered transmitters, and more than that, to take advantage of the many added possibilities offered by satellite communications. We're well aware that many of you in this world have problems in receiving a strong, clear signal from us. Our plans intend to overcome this. When all is said and done, what really counts is what is broadcast. And the Voice of America's commitment to the facts and to illuminating America for the world is our lasting bond with our listeners. We're really grateful to you for listening to the Voice of America, and we hope that we can count on you to stay our listeners. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Conklin. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us tonight, and we hope you'll tune to VOA for the next 40 years. Not to mention to the magazine show tomorrow night at the same time. Larry West directed tonight's program, and I'm Walter Guthrie in Washington, wishing you a very pleasant evening. The latest world news follows next on most of these VOA frequencies. It was the day when the Voice of America was born.
Daily at this time, we shall speak to you about America and the war. The news may be good or bad. We shall tell you the truth.
It was the 24th of February, 1942. Not so long ago.
In observance of the 40th anniversary of its first broadcast, February 24th, 1942, the Voice of America presents Not So Long Ago, its own story, told by some of the many people who gave it shape and form over the years. Your narrator is Hal Bennett.
The United States entered World War II on the 7th of December, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, Franklin Roosevelt called it, virtually unprepared for war except in one respect, its ability to wage a war of the airwaves. As Robert Persine, author of A History of the International Broadcasting Activities of the United States, notes in his doctoral thesis, long before the first Japanese bombs were dropped on Pearl Harbor, as many as 12 American radio stations were broadcasting on shortwave to the American republics. But these were commercial, privately owned radio stations.
On August 16, 1940, an executive order issued by President Roosevelt via the Council of National Defense established the agency known as the Office for Coordination of Commercial and Cultural Relations between the American Republics. Point 5 of this executive order noted, the coordinators shall be charged with the formulation of a program in cooperation with the State Department, which by effective use of governmental and private facilities in such fields as the arts and sciences, education and travel, the radio, the press, and the cinema, will further national defense and strengthen the bonds between nations of the Western Hemisphere.
11 months later, on July 11, 1941, President Roosevelt created the Office of the Coordinator of Information, which was directed to assume responsibility for all international broadcasts, except those to Latin America, related to the achievement of morale objectives abroad. As coordinator, the President appointed Colonel William J. Donovan, a World War I hero and a lawyer who had served in several high-ranking positions in the government. To assist him, Donovan chose several prominent figures from the worlds of American journalism, the arts, and culture. Among them, Robert Sherwood, a noted playwright, who was appointed head of the Foreign Information Service, which would distribute information abroad by means of posters, pamphlets, shortwave radio broadcasts, and other media. From the outset, Sherwood rejected using propaganda techniques employed by the Axis. For instance, the use of falsehood and terror. The key word in the American efforts would be information. The truth coming from America with unmistakable American sincerity, Sherwood believed, is by far the most effective means of propaganda. Working with Robert Sherwood in the Foreign Information Service was Joseph Barnes, a former Berlin correspondent of the New York Herald Tribune. He had been appointed chief of the news and editorial division. And heading what was then called the Radio Production Division, but which would become far better known as the Voice of America, was a young man on leave from the Paramount movie studios in Hollywood. He wasn't even an American citizen.
Technically, I was an enemy alien. Having been born in Romania and still awaiting citizenship, it went by where you were born, and Romania was part of the Axis, and technically I was not supposed to go near a shortwave radio set.
This is John Houseman, the first director of the Voice of America, who would later become a famous Hollywood producer and eventually even more famous as the star of the motion picture and television series Paper Chase.
It took us around 2.5 weeks to create a German show that satisfied us. I worked around the clock, for I had much to learn. I spent hours each day listening to the British and enemy broadcasts and to what our own private transmitters in America were sending out. Inevitably, the news that the Voice of America would be carrying to the was almost all bad news. As Japanese victories and invasions followed one another with sickening regularity, and the Nazi armies moved ever deeper into Russia and the Near East, we would have to report our reverses without wheezing. Only thus could we establish a reputation for honesty, which we hoped would pay off on that distant but inevitable day when we could start boasting of our own invasions and victories. Next came the problems of form and style. We needed to create shows that would sound straightforward, truthful, and clear, bearing in mind that many of our audience might be listening at the risk of their lives, but that would also have freshness and energy associated with the United States of America. Finally, on February the 11th, 1942, we were ready to launch the Voice of America on the air.
Despite the fact that all concerned were ready to transmit the first program, it was not until 2 weeks later that it was actually broadcast. For the next 13 days, dry runs, that is, programs written, rehearsed, and produced as if they were going on the air, but never actually broadcast, dry runs followed more dry runs, until the early morning hours of February 24th, 1942. On that day, everyone connected with the first broadcast gathered in one of the 3 small studios at number 270 Madison Avenue in New York City. And at 2:30 in the morning, John Hausman, who had chosen to direct the first program himself, raised his hand, the signal that the first broadcast of the Voice of America was on the air.
Hier spricht eine Stimme aus Amerika im Krieg. Unsere Stimmen kommen zu Ihnen aus New York.
This is a voice speaking from America.
The Voice from America at War.
Our voices are coming to you from New York, across the Atlantic Ocean to London, from where they are relayed to you in Germany.
Today, America has been at war for 79 days.
Daily at this time, we shall speak to you about America and the war. The news may be good or bad. We shall tell you the truth.
The show is considered a success. The State Department was silent, but the White House monitored it and congratulated us. So did the British by transatlantic phone. Later, their underground monitoring stations in neutral and enemy territories reported that the Nazis had done their heaviest jamming of the war to prevent this first Voice of America from being heard. They also drew our attention to one regrettable flaw in our show. Among the things everyone had liked was our opening and closing music. I had learned from network radio the value of a recognizable introductory theme that was characteristic and would form an identifiable signature. Sherwood, as we knew he would, had opted for the Battle Hymn of the Republic, of which Fred Waring made a special recording for us with his famous Pennsylvanian Orchestra. It sounded wonderful, and we were very proud of it, until we were informed that this was exactly the same tune as an old German soldier's song, Laura, Laura, to which the Nazi troops had marched into Norway the year before.
The battle hymn of the Republic was immediately replaced. First with the American national anthem, the Star-Spangled Banner, then with the tune which has remained to this day, with some brief interruptions, the signature theme of the Voice of America, Yankee Doodle Dandy.
Between sunspots, magnetic disturbances, storms, and enemy jamming, we were haunted during those first months of the war by the constant fear that the Voice of America, no matter how carefully we prepared and transmitted it, would never be heard by those for whom it was intended. Finally, after many weeks, a letter arrived by a circuitous route from Cannes in France. You in America cannot imagine how even a few minutes of news from America, heard by a Frenchman, is spread around. An hour after it is heard, hundreds, thousands know the truth.
Proof that VOA was also being heard in Germany came in some strange ways. The shrill annoyance from Berlin, which greeted the first VOA broadcasts, gave way to a condescending air toward those broadcasts. According to Dr. Persine, one sign used to measure effectiveness was the number of times Axis broadcasts mentioned the VOA. Between April 10th and May 10th, 1942, 88 mentions were recorded.